Eugene Viollet-le-Duc.
Sounds good.
You'll have to pardon my French throughout this conversation. He had put forward this theory that a rationally designed structure may not necessarily be beautiful, but no building can be beautiful that does not have a rationally designed structure. Louis Sullivan took this theory and he coined the maxim, form follows function. His apprentice, Flancroyd Wright, took that even further and said, form and function are one, joined in spiritual union. To set the premise for this conversation, I want to stir up this debate once more, and I'm going to ban the words, it depends, and both matter. What is function? What is form in the context of architecture? And gun to your head, in your heart of hearts, do you believe that form always follows function? Or can you make the case that function can also follow form?
Okay. So in an architectural context, when people talk about the term function, they typically mean or trying to describe what a building does or what it's used for. So for example, the function of a tall office building is as a place to work and a place to house offices. The function of a home is as a place to live, a place where, many functions, place to cook, place to sleep, place to converse with your family members, among other things. So form in architecture typically describes both the shape of a structure, okay, but also the sensibilities of it as like a physical object. So when Louis Sullivan, who you mentioned, came up with the idea that form follows function, he was addressing the fact that there was no precedent in the 19th century when he was the late 19th century when he was working for tall office buildings. It was a unprecedented type of building in cities, and particularly in American cities. And so he wanted to understand if there were, or I should say, he turned to what he believed were like laws of nature, drawn from like biological science, that the physical aspects of creatures that exist in the world emerge from the functions that they satisfy. So, for example, a functionalist biologist would say that our hands satisfy the function of being able to grip objects. Our legs are built to stand and to walk in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And so in an analogous way, he imagined how one could design a tall building in a city that satisfied the necessary use of it as a space in which to work. So that answers the first part of your question.
That answers the first part, yes.
Okay. So can form follows function? Can function follow form?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so...
and what do you believe?
So yes, we all deal with this all the time, right? So from an architectural perspective, we inhabit homes or offices or other things in which the physical disposition of it, the shape of it, the physical characteristics of it are so strong that sometimes we have to figure out how to make these spaces work for ourselves, right? So we are definitely figuring out a way in which to make function follow form. And to speak of biology again, all of us have had experiences where, let's say, we've injured our hand or our legs, or we begin to lose our eyesight, and so we have to figure out how to adjust our use of these parts of our bodies because the form of them has somehow been temporarily or permanently altered. Right? All of us at one time in our life has hurt a finger, or jammed a thumb, or hurt a hand, and had to figure out how to use our hands a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So clearly, the functions that we have to do in our daily lives as human beings can follow the forms that we find ourselves with. Yeah. Yes.
So your stance is yes.
My stance is...
I'm going to make it like a...
I mean, my stance is that these two things are always informing each other. I mean, personally, I'm very interested in architects who are working and writing in the 1950s and 1960s in particular, who are very critical of very modernist ideas like Louis Sullivan's and all the people that he influenced that demanded that form follow function. They believed these anti-functionalist architects, let's say, they believe that the forms of buildings should be determined by other things. For example, our cultural needs, our needs as people who exist in history. So for example, if you're building a building in Dubai or a building in Rome, that maybe it's not the functions that are happening in the building aren't the most critical thing, but tapping into the traditions of those cities and making buildings relate to or look like or invoke the historic architecture of those parts of the world. Yep. And so one shouldn't let function or science, let's say, inform architecture too much, because architecture is also a cultural form, a cultural practice, as much as it is a technical practice of satisfying needs.